I have some very good news. We're actually have some plans for the Noahide world. I will be actually coming out to your town. I'm going to start doing some traveling in the States when we come back from Israel, and we'll be meeting with the chief rabbi of Israel next week, and we'll be creating some nice dynamics that we're going to hopefully be able to bring this next level of the world to where it has to be. And it really is. People have to realize that this is not, people always ask me the Noahide, it's not a new thing. It's just that the world was shut down for so many years that people were not, their minds were closed. And we really have the period of time where people are starting to think again, and it really I'll just talk about Israel a second because I'm here now, and it's really incredible. I got to tell you something. I lived here for 21 years, and then I was past 17 years in the States, teaching, and I was rabbi of the synagogue and trying to help the American Jewry. But what's fascinating here is that in Israel, you see what's called kibbutz galios, the ingathering of the exiles happening before our very eyes. I just can't believe what I'm seeing. There was a place in Israel, the land of Israel is called Eretz HaTzvi, the land of the deer. Tzvi has a lot of different meanings. One meaning of tzvi is to yearn, to want, the land of wanting. There's another explanation of the land of the deer. What does it mean? Why call it the land of the deer? Because a deer, what happens is if you ever take the skin off a deer and you look, you say, wait a minute, it shrivels up, and you say, there's no way this skin could go over this body. The land of Israel is the same way. It's the size of the state of New Jersey. And so you say, oh, it's so small. But there's a principle that as the Jews return to the land stretches. I don't know how that happens.
Amazing.
I don't know how metaphysically it works, but it does. And it's incredible because I'm sitting in a town called Beit Shemesh, which was a small town many years ago. And then it expanded, and they had Beit Shemesh 1, Beit Shemesh 2, Beit Shemesh 3, Beit Shemesh 3, 2, 3B, 4, 5. I look around, and the national, I think the national emblem of Israel is the crane, because every place you turn, you see crane, you see people building, and there's this incredible expansion. Now, I want you to understand that, and it's for us, as people living in the West, it's a real issue. It's a population growth is an issue. And the first commandment is to peruvu, is to be fruitful and multiply in this week's Torah portion. And fruitful and multiply, it says, why not just be fruitful? What mean multiply? Because more than one. People don't have one child, they have more. And there are people in the world, and I don't, again, I sometimes rant and rave once. I don't mean to make fun of them, but they look at the world through their glasses and they don't see. They say, wait a minute, too many people, cut back. But they don't understand that there's a plan and things move a certain way. And yes, unfortunately, there are communities that are shrinking, and they really are. I mean, if you look at the demographics in certain Western countries, it's not positive what's happening. In Israel, there's an expansion happening, and that's a very good thing, because it's a sign of as I said to you many times, the ultimate signal that the Mashiach, the Messiah, is close is when the land of Israel will be reestablished and will give its produce. And I see people coming, and it's vibrant, it's quite alive. And that's the most amazing thing. Now, I want to be clear with you one thing here. The book of Eicha, the book of Lamentations, that was written before the destruction of the temple. So the sages tell us that yes, there was when God's presence left, then the prophets were already feeling the destruction. So to understand the land of Israel, the godly presence, you can feel it. but we're talking about obviously a completely exponentially, infinitely times different reality when we talk about the third base of Migdash. We talk about that level of God's presence being felt in the land of Israel. What we're doing now is we're preparing what's called the vessel. If you look in the story with in the prophets, with the prophet Elisha. So Elisha the prophet tells the woman she needs to get she has no oil, she has no food. Tells her to bring vessels, and then start pouring, and then there'll be a miracle, and there'll be more and more oil. One of the ideas of that is that every single one of us has to create a vessel to receive whatever good we want. So if you imagine, as parents who we were all once children, and our parent wants to give us something. The analogy, the parent wants to give the kid a car, but the kid is a mess and he's all over the place. The parent to buy the child the car is negative. The child has to create a responsibility, an ability to receive the good the parent wants to give. That's what's happening right now in Israel. The groundwork is really, really happening. It's so palpable. You can really feel it. It's incredible development for me, because I lived here for 21 years. And to see, you leave and you come back and you see it and you feel, oh, really, this process is speeding up. It really is. We just finished the Shemitah year, the 7th cycle, where the fruits of the land are ownerless, right? The 7th year, nobody can grow the fruits of the Sabbath. No one grows the fruit; it grows wild. Everyone takes it. So and I got to share with you. I think for me, when you eat that fruit, it's very powerful. So for me to get what's called otzer based in fruit from the land of Israel that was grown wild in the 7th year was very powerful. And really right now things are moving in this very, very positive way. I'm very excited about it. And that's a good thing, because when you look at the news today, it's hard to get excited. It's hard to get excited because the world is, without getting too political, but obviously the people who have an agenda that they're trying to run the world, and they obviously don't have any idea of what they're doing. There was I forgot his name. He was the Surgeon General in New York in the 70s. I forgot his name. I think his name was Coop. I think his name was. And I remember one time he has a book that he wrote about his time as Surgeon General, and he writes there that when they would come to him with life or death questions, that he said this was beyond what I know. I'm a talented doctor. I'm a skilled surgeon, whatever his quality was. He said, but certain things were beyond my level. I didn't know it was life and death things. He said, but there was a Jewish sage, Rav Moshe Feinstein, that he would go to and he would ask him these questions. That's the way the world has to be. How does someone decide, the discussion of when does life start? I mean, everyone who doesn't have a Torah is shooting in the dark and saying their ideas. But if they could turn to the Holy Land and turn to the sages who have the information, then that's what it says. The verse is Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah. The Torah comes out from Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Fascinating thing. That's why the Sanhedrin, the court had to be in the temple. That was the place. The God's presence was from there. They were able not just to be smart. A lot of smart people in the world. It's not just being smart. It's that's really not it at all. As a matter of fact, very often, not very often, but there are people who learn Torah, who are very smart, who do not get the benefit of the Torah they learn. It's a fascinating thing, because like this. Let's say I'm getting the information in the Torah, but I'm not open to hearing what God wants from me. So what people unfortunately can do is they could take that power and misuse it. The Talmud talks about that exact reality. So the Sanhedrin that sat in the place of the temple, their wisdom wasn't from their own smarts, not smart people in the world. Their wisdom was they had to use the human effort as much as they could to get understanding, but then they had to have the ability to be open to receive what God wanted to give them. If I have my own agenda, and this is really in the last week's Torah portion, we have the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the tree of life, and it's a very, very, very deep topic. And if you look there, it's a fascinating thing because God said not to eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but he didn't say you couldn't eat the tree of life. It was only afterwards when Adam ate the tree of knowledge of good and evil, God said you can't eat the tree of life now. You know why? Because if you're connected to the source, the tree of life, then the knowledge that I get is straight, is pure because it comes from the source. When you cut off and I have my idea and I know better, so I got a problem right now. Did you ever think what it means that Adam and Eve wouldn't have eaten the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they would have lived forever? What does that mean? It's like an analogy. If you have an appliance and you plug it into the wall, as long as it's plugged in, the electricity is running. You can keep going. When you disconnect it, even if you put a battery in, it's only going to last as long as the battery. Adam and Eve, before they ate the tree of knowledge of good and evil, what happened was they were connected to the source. And that's how life would have continued. The problem of knowledge of good and evil meant was, as you saw in the story, the Nachash, the serpent, says, if you eat this, you will be Elohim, you'll be like your own God. I have my own ideas. And this is one of the hardest parts about being a human being. We are supposed to want to know because we have been given the ability to understand. It's the greatest gift. That is, in some explanations, what it means, that the image of God. One explanation is we have awareness and understanding. Understand what that means. The people who try to compare people to animals have a very, very unfortunate misunderstanding of reality. The most, an animal has awareness of the other, right? The dog sees a cat, he's aware of the cat. The dog has no awareness of self, right? The dog doesn't say, am I being a good dog today? The dog cannot go and extrapolate and think about itself. Human beings have understanding that they have the ability to look outside of themselves, have self-awareness. That's the awareness of the other, awareness of the self. Now, that is a gift. Sometimes people cut it off and they say, I know better. And then they cut off from the tree of life. They don't get now the direct source. So that's my first point. Being in the land of Israel now, as Dan just said, it's happening. It's real. And as I said to you before, I'm very excited. We're going to be meeting with the Chief Rabbi of Israel to talk about our program with the Noahides to really have it come out from Zion that the word of Hashem will be heard from the whole world, and it's really the time. It really is a time. If you look at the news, stuff is really, really going crazy. I some of the things in the news lead us to this next coming week's Torah portion, which is the story of the flood. People were doing crazy, crazy things that if you read the Midrashim that explain what they were doing and how they were acting, completely amoral, bizarre. And unfortunately, a lot of that behavior right now is coming back into the world in new forms. Now, I want to start with a little bit about the flood. Does anyone know here what was the reason? What was the problem? Why did the people in the generation of the flood? It said that they were totally had illicit relations. They were out of control, and also theft. I want to ask you a question. This is open for everyone to answer. Why did they fall in that kind of way? What happened? Why? What was in their society that led them to go in this unbridled way of illicit relations with every single thing and stealing? And what was happening in the society that was the trigger? I have an open question for everybody. Yeah, Ronald.
Idolatry?
Well, not so much. Not so much. I mean, there obviously was idolatry, but it was even though there was idolatry started even earlier, but the generation of the flood, that wasn't their main thing. Their main thing was illicit relations. That was their main thing. That's what it says in the text, and it says that they kol basar. They changed their ways, meaning that they were having relations with all these intimate relations in inappropriate ways. That was their big problem. Wasn't idolatry.
Wasn't the final reason just their injustice to each other, injustice to man?
Yeah, that's true. The straw that broke the camel's back was theft. Because, and I'll just tell you the simple thing why, because really a society, once that breaks down, a society that has some, I mean, we're gonna use the analogy because it's happening right now. It is at a city near you, a place that has lawlessness, that there's no boundaries, that there's no way these people are going to get together and inspire one another to say, hey, you're not doing the right thing. So that's a boundary at that point that was gone, and that was the final straw. But what was it about their society, you think, that led them to pursue these things? Anyone have any ideas? Rod.
Rabbi, I have a suggestion. We know that Adam and Eve were supposed to eat of the tree of wisdom. We had this great discussion about this last week. And they chose first the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that which was good in their own eyes, basically, right? At least it looks good. We should do that. And it almost seems that there was this sort of attitude that was passed on to a whole generation of people that says, let's do what makes me feel good. Let's do what satisfies me. If I can steal from somebody, that's fine. If I cheat somebody, that's fine. If somebody makes me angry, I murder them. It's just that they were following suit of the knowledge of good and evil without the wisdom. And it was only Adam and his descendants that had the wisdom because of what was passed down. What do you think?
So I think that's a good line, but I just want to use the words properly. I only mean the tree of wisdom, I mean the tree of life. I know it's used synonymously, but we want to keep it because otherwise it's a little confusing. Now, so the tree of
right. Yeah,
right. Now it's the tree of knowledge, good and evil. The truth is that the sages tell us that all of the cardinal sins were included in there. So you're right. There is the ability when the serpent says you'll be like God, that's idolatry. Mm-hmm. Because idolatry, as I've said to you many times, is not really serving another deity. That's not really it. The goal of idolatry is to serve yourself, because that's why they do it. In other words, the people who do idolatry believe I can manipulate this. I can, rub the genie bottle. I could say the incantation. I could do this, and I'll make something happen. That means I want to you can't fool God. So everyone realizes that when you're dealing with Hashem, you can't go and manipulate. Their belief was to manipulate spiritual forces. That's idolatry, but it's really serving themselves. So when the serpent says that, yes, you will be like gods. That's an act of idolatry. Then it says it was desirous in her eyes. That's the second thing. And then afterwards, death came into the world, and they brought death in the world. So everything was created at that moment. That's true. That's true. But what happened in the generation of the flood, this is just an important thing to note. The sages tell us that the world had everything they wanted. It talks about it barely rained. It rained once in a very, very long time, the Medrash says. And the weather was always temperate. It actually could be that there is a discussion whether the Earth's axis changed. There could be a possibility the Earth changed, according to the Malbim, to the Earth axis actually changed. Because the text says, what?
Slightly. It changed slightly.
Yeah. Because what happens is it says in the text that now there was going to be summer, winter, cold, hot. The implication is that the world was temperate before, which is what the Medrash says. The Bible explains that there was even a shift at that point in terms of the Earth's axis. And if you look, I Googled it once, if the Earth's axis was actually straight, the weather would be temperate throughout all time. So what happened was the weather was perfect. It barely ever rained. There was tremendous wealth. Now, wait a minute. Isn't that the goal? I thought that's what I was shooting for. So if you look at it, you really realize that's what happens. Now, I mean, I don't know if anyone here is from California, but you look at a place like California, and whoever's been there, it's like beautiful. It barely ever rains, and it's always green, and it's fantastic. And like sometimes when people get everything that they want physically, they don't know how to deal with it.
Right.
As a matter of fact, it's almost always like that. People don't like, start doing all this crazy stuff when they're like, struggling to get, to get a meal. So what happened is that the generation of the flood, the thing that actually was the catalyst to all their illicit relations was that they had it so good. So you got to think about that a second, because in a society where the goal is that we all want to, that's the greatest thing, the Western standard of living, it's a fascinating thing to think about. Like and it changes, because I remember like when I was a kid, you had one TV. Now a person comes in, they don't have two TVs? You have two cars? Well, it's like, it becomes like, this is the standard of living, and it's the expectation. But on one hand, yes, we all want to have a standard of living, but our standard of living is what kings used to have, right? Running water in your house. Who had running water? Okay, they had slaves bringing it in, but like we do have an incredible standard of living. And what happens is that was the environment for the generation of the flood that caused them to just become further self-indulgent. Now, again, this is a very important thing because it's crucial for a person to say, well, how do I deal with having the things I want? And that's why, one of the reasons why saying blessings is so crucial. Because if you don't say a blessing, then you don't really recognize where you're getting what you're getting from. In other words, the Talmud says it's like stealing, because wait a minute, where'd you get this from? Oh, there's a source. So it's crucial in the good things we get to acknowledge the source that's giving it to us, because without that, it becomes there's a principle in the Talmud, and if you look at your own lives, we'll all see it. Principle is, if you have 100, you want 200. You have 200, you want 400. It's not a bad thing. It's the nature of people. That's the way we're built. in a certain way, it's good. In a certain way, it's ambition. We are creatures that strive for stuff, and that in a certain way has a positive element if we use it properly, right? If we strive, if we take what we strive for, and we strive for positive things, it's the greatest thing in the world. But if we just want more and we just become, like the Matrix, sitting there and just like, the next thing is that's the generation of the flood. That's what happens. And if you don't believe me, go look at Southern California and you will see everything I'm telling you is exactly happening. It happens in the world. And it was funny. I was once considering taking a rabbinic position in California. And what happened was they brought me out, and I was interviewing there, and it was going very well, this and that. And everything was so gorgeous. The person brought me into their house, and they had these mirrors and these murals, and it was really beautiful. And then they took me to the mall. And I never saw a mall like this. There were palm trees growing in the mall, and there was glass ceilings. And all of a sudden, an old rock and roll song came on called Hotel California. And the line came out, you can check in anytime you like, but you can check in anytime you like, but you can never leave. And I said, no, I don't think I'm taking this position. And the guy says to me, he says, but Rabbi, you do so well here. He said, I'm one of the only people who are married only once. Most people have married 3-4 times. You could do great in counseling. I said, that's not healthy. So what happens is that when people sometimes are inundated with more and more and more, the nature is that they start looking for this, looking for more, and to the point where actually, and this is fascinating psychological insight that Noahides shares with us. He says that when people have everything they want, every pleasure they want unbridled, they actually start looking for unnatural pleasures. You hear that? Isn't that crazy? A person, it's amazing. When a person, because the way we are is we want more. So now you got everything you want. So the person starts looking for things that they naturally wouldn't even want, but they create that in themselves. So this is a very relevant situation because I think it's happening. It's happening right before our eyes. I think that, and back to what Ronald said earlier, I don't know if people know this, but in the text from last week's Torah portion, it says in the 3rd generation already, the text says, I don't know how you translate it in English, but Az uchal b'shem Hashem. Then they started calling God's name, which means they started calling inanimate objects God. That's when idolatry started. The 3rd generation. Isn't that crazy? Adam, Seth, Shais, and then Enosh, the 3rd generation, idolatry already crept in. And I explained how that worked. What that worked was, Maimonides says, the way it worked was that people first said, they weren't dumb. They said, listen, the sun is doing God's works. We got to thank the officer who's doing the king's work. So thank the sun. And eventually they started seeing these items in the world as separate power sources and worshiping them. But that was when that happened, and I don't know if everyone knows this because it's not said straight in the text, but there was a tremendous catastrophe, a tsunami, a flood that happened that killed 1/3 of the world at the time. So I'm telling you these things because we're looking at our society, what's happening. We have to realize what happened because they started worshiping idolatry. Now, do we worship idolatry today? What do you think? Let's open it up. What do you guys think? Is there idolatry today? Yes or no? What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. Money.
Okay, what's that? Money. Okay. All right. So very good. So let's talk about 2 things. And I explained this to you once. The root desire for idolatry that was in times thousands of years ago, that has been removed from the world. The sages prayed to remove it. The reason why there was the classic idolatry desire was because there was everything in the world's in a balance, and there was this power for prophecy that people wanted to connect to God, and there had to be an equal and opposite potential for the other things. Some people wanted to connect to phony spiritual forces and manipulate them. That root of that doesn't exist anymore because we always prayed for it to be gone. And so people who still do idolatry in places like India and stuff like that, they're really doing what they have just got from their forefathers. It's not the same thing. So the classic idolatry that we don't have. But the idea of idolatry, as Jeannie said, is correct, is that idolatry is when you are going to infuse some other power. Here's another one, Jeannie. What do you think about this one? Do you think our technology has become our idol? How about our science? Follow the science. Follow the science when it suits you, right? So what does that mean? I mean, I'm not, it's so funny because I have a friend, he's a very great rabbi in Israel. He was once the dean of philosophy in Johns Hopkins. And he told me once that he asked the professor of science, he says, how much of the things you're teaching now you think you'll be teaching in 10 years from now? He says almost none of it. What? If you look, science finds new things. Science defines the positive scientific theories defines the phenomenon observed in a way that explains it. And when you learn new
Methodology.
things, that's methodology, right? But as you learn new things, you see it differently. Do you know? I think it was 1900 or 1901. I forgot what it was. I once read that they had a convention, a scientist convention. I think it was in 1900, celebrating that we basically have discovered everything there is to discover. I mean, it's comical. The only thing that's more comical is that we're exactly the same people today. Yeah, we figured it all out. We know exactly what happened. Yeah, we know. No, you don't know. You have a theory. Science is advanced. But people hook into what they believe is their power source. And this is, if I have my money, if I have my technology, this is what's, so this society is very obsessed with that. That was a generation of the called the Dor Enos generation, that a third of the world was wiped out. And then there's, in this week's parsha, the end of the story, which is the generation of the Tower of Babel. And I want to tell you what they did, because even though I think that on the surface it looks like their main thing was right, they built a tower to the heavens and they put an idol on top of it with a sword. So it seems that their problem was really idolatry, but it was a much deeper problem. Their problem was they wanted to separate the spiritual and the physical. They said, God, you leave us alone. We're going to manipulate the world ourselves. And in a certain sense, that's called murder. Why is that murder? What's death? Death's when the soul leaves the body. So when a person wants to go and push out the spiritual, that is the thing that enlivens the physical, that they're living in a world of death. These are what's called the three cardinal sins that these generations did, and you see them today, literally happening. On one hand, people making their power sources. Another one, people chasing after illicit relations and all these things of the generation of the flood because they have everything they want. And the other people who want to separate a non-spiritual world from the completely physical. That's the situation of the world today. That's why when Dan asked me at the beginning, I come not to bear bad news, but to give you good news, that even though the world looks as insane as it really, really is, That's exactly what it says, that before Mashiach comes, the generation is going to look out of control. One source says the generation, I don't know if I told you this, it says the generation, the leaders will have the face of a dog. You know why? I don't know if I told you this, but you know what a dog, I think I told you this once. When you walk your dog and you turn the corner, see, when you walk the dog always runs in front, right? Dogs run in front, like they're in charge. Then when you turn the corner, what does the dog do? It catches up because it sees you turn the corner, but then it runs in the front as if it's leading. So the generation at the end, the leaders are looking, what do the people want? We're not leading. We're just like, there's the masses that are saying this, and we don't have the ability to really differentiate what's true and what's not. So just follow the masses. That's the situation in the world today. And if you look in the two parshas that we just started, last week's and this coming week, you say, oh my gosh, God created the world for a purpose, and people went off so quickly. And you might start to think, you might get like depressed. You're like, wait a minute, the third generation already? People are birds, or idols? Well, what's going on here? The good news is that this is all part of a plan. The world, and I want to say this many, many times so you hear me clearly, the world is moving to perfection. I want you to imagine a second, and I don't know how it's going to play out, but I want you to imagine a world that, like we're living in, where things look like it's totally insane. Imagine at the end, if you're going to see everything coming to exactly where God wanted it to be, and becomes the world of truth, and everyone who thought they were in charge and pushing their agenda, they weren't. And you start to see it's not just that God is going to, they're doing what they're doing and God's going to overcome them. That's not what it is. Everything people are doing that seems to be counter to the goal, in the end is brought towards the goal. That's what's happening right now. People are lost, they're confused, they're making up stuff, they're shooting from the hip. And what happens is that in Jerusalem, there are the sages sitting there and understanding what's happening. And it's very, very tangible. And it's a great thing. And I think it's a great thing that I do think, like I said to you before, I think that what's happening is that the globalization of the world, which on one hand has been very dangerous and very negative, is going to be a great thing, because in the end, it is a globalization. In the end, it's like we said in the prayers of Rosh Hashanah, we said, and the whole world will together worship and serve Hashem. So you need to bring everything in from the four corners of the earth, and that is starting to happen. And you know the way it works, the darkest hours before the dawn. So people start to yell and scream because they're about to be shown to be, no, you don't know what you're talking about. There is a truth here, and now stop talking and start to listen. And so I'm going to compliment you all who come to listen to words of Torah, and give you a blessing that you should be able to be part of it and to experience the good that's happening.